So let me say good evening to everyone as we are getting started. This is Nelson Pierce, pastor of Beloved Community Church, and we are going to be starting a conversation um, with Tia Clark. All right, and we are about to connect on multiple platforms. All right. Here we go. So we are live on multiple platforms, on Instagram, and on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you are following us. Won't you just take a moment and just say hi? Let us know that you're out there, that you're checked into the conversation. Even if you're watching this later, just drop a note to let us know that you're there.
So I want to thank you all for joining. Let's see. Oh, we got Courtney says hi. Hey, girl. I'm seeing some more familiar faces. All right. Well, I think we should go ahead and get started. It's about 8:34. So I just want to thank, hey, Kiana, girl. Thanks for joining. Again, I just want to thank everyone for joining our discussion tonight. So, as always, we'll start with introductions. I guess I'll go first. My name is Tia Clark, and I'm the host of Two Girl Podcast. What we do on my platform is every month we do live streams, and we just basically talk about the issues, just different things that a lot of times that we don't shed a lot of light on that we do need to discuss. So my goal is to just bring awareness, and hopefully tonight's message blesses someone. So Nelson, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, I am Nelson Pierce. I'm the pastor of Beloved Community Church. And I am so glad to be a part of this conversation. The last conversation we had was so rich and so powerful. I'm really excited for tonight's conversation and what we have on deck.
Me too, because can I say I'm still getting like feedback from the last conversation that we had. So like I've been looking forward to this all week.
That's good. I have been too. I've been looking forward to this. Yes.
And then the fact that you set all of this up, like where we can stream on multiple platforms, I'm so thankful for that. Because if you would have left it up to me, we wouldn't have been here. Alrighty. So again, tonight we're going to be talking about forgiveness and freedom. The motivation behind this conversation is the fact that I think that this is something that a lot of us struggle with, at least speaking for myself. So I just felt like it was just really important to have this discussion. So, with that being said, we're going to jump right into things. And the first question I have for you is: do you feel like a lot of people struggle with forgiveness? And if so, why?
That's a great question. Um, I do feel like a lot of people struggle with forgiveness. Um, and I think it's a couple of reasons. One is um, there are a lot of people who think what they should do is forgive, even when they're not ready to. And so they are forgiving out of obligation rather than forgiving because they feel like it's um, because their heart is ready or their spirit is in it. And so it's like forced forgiveness. Um, the other thing I think that happens a lot is um, people who are hold on one second. I've got some audio feedback. Let me fix this real quick.
Okay.
Okay, that should help some of it. The other thing that I um, happen is people um, who decide that they don't want to forgive and they close themselves to it, never avail themselves of an opportunity to get to a place where they forgive. And both extremes can be really harmful to our growth ultimately. And I think what I hope in this conversation that we press upon people is that there's a middle way that you can do both.
Absolutely. And I want to take a second to highlight what you said because I think it's so real about forced forgiveness. I think sometimes the knee jerk reaction is even before we're ready to just be like, oh, I forgive you. I'm cool. It's fine because we think that's what we should do. But in reality, like we haven't really forgiven the person and like we're holding on to that. And it's kind of like festering inside of us because we haven't really expressed how we truly feel. We're saying what we think we should say. And going back to what you said, it's kind of like that forced forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a
That's
lot.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I think that's right. I think anything that we feel like we do because we need to without really taking time to assess if we're ready for it, our body responds to it, like our spirit responds to that. And it ultimately ends up not being healthy. And so one of the things that I think it's so important that we do is that we are really intentional about thinking about what we do and at what point that we do it. I think forgiveness is almost always the best option, but the question is when.
Hey Nelson,
Um,
I'm getting some feedback that we're breaking up, that people are on, but we're kind of breaking up.
okay, give me 1 second. Let me try one more thing with this.
Okay.
Okay, I think I've. Is it possible that you could lower the volume on your speaker on your computer?
I definitely can do that. Let's see. How about now?
I think that's better.
How's our sound, everybody? If you guys can type in the chat and let us know if you guys are still getting feedback or anything. So I think we're good.
Okay, yeah, I think that's better. This is, this is what happens when you do this stuff in real time.
Right. Yeah, okay, that
Right.
said better. So that's good. Like you said, real
All right.
time. So sorry, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing is um aligning the timing when we are when we're ready to forgive with our action. And so I'll give you an example to kind of help make it clear. Um, I had a very close familial relationship, and it was really hard and problematic. Um, and so we had a separation, and there were a lot of people who said, you ought to forgive them, you ought to move past it, you ought to try to reconcile. And everything in my body wouldn't let me do it. And so I had to wait until I was ready to be able to deal with that. Had I not, I would have performed the action of forgiveness. I would have said I had forgiven them, but my body still would have resisted that.
That's so real. And I appreciate you sharing that point because I've been in situations where, like, my words said that I forgave the
Mhm.
person, and I'm like, oh, I forgave you. But, like, when they come around, I'm getting tight, I'm angry, I'm still thinking about what happened. So, even though, like, I told them that I forgave them, and maybe I even wanted to, recognizing that in actuality, I had not forgiven the person and that there was more work that I needed to do within myself, if
Right.
I wanted to move forward and be like continue that relationship. And even if I didn't want to continue the relationship, just the point of being able to forgive.
Yeah. No, that's real. Um, the that is a big thing that happens. Is that sometimes um we choose the immediacy of the relationship over ourselves and lose ourselves in the process.
Mhm.
It's like if you're flying on an airplane and they tell you, if there's an emergency, you got to put the oxygen mask over yourself first, and
Right.
then the person who's with you. So many times in our relationships, we're trying to put the oxygen mask on the other person to save the relationship, and then we're suffocating while that's happening. Whereas if we took the time to be attentive to and care for ourselves first, then we could reconcile the relationship from a healed place rather than trying to reconcile from still a hurt place.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, you in that statement, you just dropped so many gems. Like, I don't even need to recap what you said, but just to emphasize, I think in relationships, it for many of us, it's we are so concerned in most cases to try to protect the other person's feelings and try to save the relationship and tiptoe around the other person's feelings that we often sometimes ignore our feelings and we aren't being true to ourselves. And we may not realize that by doing that, that's actually could be, I should say, causing further harm to the relationship in the long term sense because we're holding on to all of that stuff, even if we don't feel like we are. And a lot of times what that looks like is that comes out later in the relationship, whereas other situations arise, we're still holding on to like, oh, well, I remember when they did X, Y, and Z. And we're almost kind of keeping a tally in the score and like
Mhm.
comparing it to the initial offense, right?
That's absolutely right. And somebody on Facebook just asked a question that makes this point. If you don't mind me sharing the question.
Sure.
So I posted it for the people on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll read it for the people on Instagram. It says, if I let someone borrow money and they never pay me back, but they ask to borrow money again, and I decide not to because they didn't pay me the first time, people think that means I never forgave them. Do you guys agree? I think
That's a good
this
question.
I think this gets to the point of forgiveness. This is a great question
Hmm.
because this is one of the biggest points. And I think forgiveness cannot happen without an admission of wrongdoing.
Hmm.
Um, the as a pastor, when we talk about forgiveness and we talk about the way that God forgives us, part of that process is the process of repentance, which means that I acknowledge that I've done something wrong, and then I am able then to receive God's forgiveness. If somebody does not admit or acknowledge that they have done something wrong, then I don't think forgiveness comes into play. Accountability comes into play.
Hmm.
And then, so if you don't loan somebody money when they ask because they never paid back the last one, this isn't an issue of forgiveness. This is an issue of accountability.
Absolutely.
Now,
And
here's the go ahead.
I would say, and I would also add to that is like, I can forgive you because I need to forgive you to be free and for my self healing, but that doesn't mean I'm going to lend you money again.
Right.
So it's like I'm forgiving you in the sense that, hey, I lent you this money, you decided not to pay me back. I didn't That's not how I would have moved or operated. And it's like I forgive you in the sense that that's what I need to do to be free and to heal, but I'm probably not going to lend you money again. And like you said, that's not me not lending you money is not a forgiveness thing. That's more of an accountability and a boundaries thing, because at the same time, I can't let you continue to try to take advantage of me.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you think about, this is a great way to think about like the banking system, where loan forgiveness is a real thing. If you borrow money from the bank has the right to come claim their money back,
Mm-hmm.
either by you paying them back, or they can file a lawsuit against you to get it back if you don't pay them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the bank may forgive the loan,
Mm-hmm.
which means they they acknowledge that you cannot pay them back,
Mm-hmm.
and they decide that they're not going to press legal action against you
Mm-hmm.
or report it to your credit.
Right.
And that's loan forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
But just because the bank has forgiven the loan does not obligate the bank to loan you money again.
I love that example. Like, I love that example.
And that happens whether it's in this case where it's somebody borrowing money or it happens in a relationship, it's the same thing.
Right.
Somebody may do an action that harms me in the context of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I can forgive that action, which means I am not trying to punish them for what they've done. I'm not trying to seek revenge.
Right.
I am not harboring the hurt. But just because I have forgiven that action, that does not obligate me to restore them to the place they were before the hurt.
Exactly. Exactly. And that goes back to what you were saying previously about the accountability piece, because it's like, for me, it's like we had an initial agreement of that I lended you this money with the expectation that it will be returned and paid back. And when you didn't do that, that for me is now, it's the trust is broken. Like, I
Mm,
can't depend on you to keep your word. And again, going back to what you said, well, I forgive you and I'm not necessarily harboring it. I'm not going to put myself back in the situation for that to potentially happen again.
that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That was a really good question. And I think that's a very common situation. So that was a great question. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yep. Thank you, Brother Rogers, for the question.
Yeah, that was great. All right. So next question. Would you say that you are a person that holds grudges?
Would I say that I am a person that holds grudges? I would not say that. That doesn't mean it's not true. Um, I um I think it depends on what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think um I think there are a lot of places in which keeping receipts is kind of the in vogue term. I think it's the in vogue term.
Yeah.
It's at least old in vogue, even if it ain't young folk in vogue. There's a part of me that keeps track of what has happened, and then makes decisions about what I do about that. And I think more often than not, I try to lean into forgiveness and reconciliation. Like it's what I want to do. Um, the I think in practice, it's easy for me to remember what has happened, even if I'm trying to work forward in a new relationship with a person.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, especially about the part about keeping receipts, because I am the receipt screenshot queen. Definitely working on it, but it's one of those things that, and you touched on this, as things happen that might be similar to a previous quote unquote mishap or offense, I am a person that and it's really not intentional on my part, but I'm kind of like, oh, wow, they did this again, or they did something similar. And I remember last week on Monday at 8:04. And so my mind tends to go that route with things, even if my intentions are to operate from a place of forgiveness, understanding, and grace. But a lot of times for me it's not the easiest thing, if I'm just being honest.
Um, I think that's human nature, right?
Yeah.
I think part of that is um, how our biology responds to make sure that we protect ourselves. And so that it's easy to remember those things, and it's hard to let them go. And I think a part of that is healthy. Like, I wouldn't advise anybody to work too hard against that. I think um I think what is also healthy is when we make decisions to be intentional about our actions, with that, knowing that that's true,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just because I remember what you have done doesn't mean I have to treat you based on what you have done.
That's powerful.
Also, just because I've made a decision to forgive you doesn't mean I have to act as if it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
the question is, what is best for me as an individual, for the relationship, for the ongoing um health of all of those who are involved. And those are going to be different situation by situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that you're spot on in that, in terms of that it varies based on the situation, on how you move and have to make adjustments based on the situation, and also the relationship, the history of the relationship. And I love what you said, that the um, the response of protecting yourself is not a bad thing. It's actually a smart and healthy thing to do. But like you said, you can be aware of something that someone has done to you without treating them in such a way. And I think that's where that's the challenging part. And where I struggle to find like the middle ground on that.
Damn, that's real. That's real. And I think that struggle is natural. You know, it is a
Mhm.
part of the learning process, the growing process. Um, the any thought that we have to have it all figured out, or that every decision or every action has to be perfect, is just um, it's an impossible standard to live up to. And so
Right.
there's a process in this in which we should and we ought to show ourselves grace, because we're all learning, we're all figuring this out.
And yeah, and I think that that's in terms of like holding a grudge sometimes where I have to kind of like reel myself in terms of, like you said, granting that grace. Because we're all like trying to figure this thing out. We're all learning, and nobody is perfect. And
Mhm.
I know for a fact that I've offended people and done things that certainly am not the proudest of. And so I have to remember that when things happen to me, and I'm like, well, I would never do that. And how could they? And that's just, I have to kind of sometimes reel myself back in, because if I think about certain situations I've been in, I've been like, maybe Tia, you didn't handle that so great.
Right, right. That's real. Like, I think our ability to be thoughtful about ourselves, and when we have not always done what's what might be best, it's really helpful in having that empathy and grace for others. But I also think it's important to do that reflexively. I think there
Mhm.
are some people who are much better at showing grace to others than they are at showing grace to themselves. And there's some people who their learning curve is not about forgiving somebody else, but it's about forgiving themselves.
Mhm.
And we've got to be able to, wherever our learning curve is on that, to lean into that and practice that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's so real. I didn't even think about the fact that, some people, like you said, are really good at granting grace to others, but they don't have that same grace for themselves.
Yeah.
And that in itself, that can be can create challenges in itself.
Yeah.
Say
Yeah.
that.
It really can. It absolutely can.
All right. So, next question. Let's talk about the benefits of forgiving others.
Let's talk about the benefits. So one of the first benefits of forgiveness, I think, happens for the person who is forgiving,
Mhm.
is when I forgive, it allows me um, to begin a process of healing of something that has happened.
Mhm.
Um, that as long as I am holding on to the offense, um, it is hard for that wound to heal. If you think about getting cut and you're holding the cut, it's hard for the oxygen to get in to heal it. You can't treat it if there needs to be something cleaned out of the wound as long as you're holding on to it. And so the first thing you have to do is let it go to let the healing process begin. So forgiveness, first and foremost, is about allowing myself the space to allow, as a pastor, I would say God's love,
Mhm.
but to allow love to allow space and time, to allow that place of hurt to be able to be healed.
Absolutely. And might I say, you are coming through with the examples tonight. So shout out to you. But no, I mean, definitely, I think that, you are right. That is definitely a benefit, the healing process. And I think also another benefit is in the title of the podcast tonight is freedom. I think what we
Hmm.
don't forget is like you're almost like a prisoner. You're a prisoner of your situation because you're kind of and I've been in this space where you're just kind of like stuck in whatever's happened to you, and like you're constantly talking about it, like you're constantly dwelling on it, like you're frustrated, you're just frustrated, and it's almost like, again, like you're a prisoner of your situation. So just the freedom of
Yeah, that's real. Um, the as much as other search situations can create oppressive environments, we can create them for ourselves.
that. Hmm.
And you're absolutely right that forgiveness allows for that freedom to be present in our lives.
Absolutely. I just remember like growing up, my grandmother would always say, and I would get so frustrated with her. She was like, You're walking around upset with this person, constantly thinking about it, and this person has gone on, like they're having a great day, and like you're stuck in that space." And it's just like a lot of times, we think, I won't say we think, but it's kind of like operating a place from like, well, I'm just going to show them that I'm upset and this isn't okay and this is going to punish them. And in actuality, we're punishing ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much unforgiveness can cause more damage to the self than it does to the person, to the other
Exactly.
person. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so like I said, growing up, my grandmother would always tell me that. I'm like, no, but you don't understand. I can't let them get away with this. And
Yeah.
so that was my thing. Like, nobody could get away with anything with me.
Right, right, right. And there are a lot of times um we are unable to hold people like we are really unable to make people pay more times than we would like to admit.
Right.
Also, the cost of making someone pay, quote
Mhm.
unquote, can be so detrimental to the self that we end up paying twice as much than what the other person ends up paying for it. Whether it's the cost in missed energy, missed opportunities, missing what is around us,
Mhm.
because we are so focused on trying to make someone pay that we are not open to what God or the world or the universe is putting in front of us. The time and energy that we miss um, because we are so locked in on trying to make someone pay. Like there are so many things that we might miss because we are putting time and energy to that. Um, and I just believe, um, whether you call it the principle of sowing and reaping, whether you call it karma,
Mhm.
I believe that God or the universe can do so much more to make someone pay than I can do anyway. And so there are times when it's better just to let that go.
Absolutely. I mean, another thing my grandmother used to always say, like when I was growing up, you reap what you reap what
Yeah.
you sow. And she used to always tell me, not that not that you're sitting around waiting for something bad to happen to someone, but a lot of times, you may not be around to see how it plays out for the person. But I am a strong believer that you do reap what you sow. Like you said, rather
Hmm.
that people identify that as karma, and a lot of times, it's best to just let it go and let whatever's coming to that person, not saying you're wishing bad on them, just come to them and you go on about your life.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Um, the um, Sometimes the best payback possible is you showing up as a healed person,
That part.
and you being able to move on and no longer dwelling on that. Sometimes that can um, um, be better payback than anything you could think or plan or try to execute.
Right, right. Because I think just in general, a lot of times, and this is a general statement, when we take things in our own hand and feel like, oh, we're gonna get even, or I'm in control of this, it usually comes back on us, and it's usually not a great situation.
Yeah, that's right. That is right.
So I think you summed it up. Like sometimes the best quote unquote payback is to just show up as a healed, healthy person about your business moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if the person who has harmed you has done so intentionally, as long as you are wrapped up in unforgiveness or payback, you are playing right into their hand.
Hmm.
That is the best thing you can do for them. And the most, not only the most productive for you, but the most frustrating thing for you to do to them is to exit out of that, is to
Hmm.
not be round and round, not be caught up in that cycle, that destructive cycle with them, but to say, I'm going to let you continue to play your games over here by yourself, and I'm going
Exactly.
to move on. I'm going to be healed. I'm going to grow. I'm going to thrive over here, outside of you and outside of this unhealthy container.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on this earlier. We were talking about in the sense of money, but I think just to make it more general, like forgiveness doesn't mean that we got to be buddy buddy and I got to sit up under you. We got to call each other every day and we're best friends. Forgiveness doesn't mean that. Forgiveness, like, hey, I acknowledge that this offense hurt me. It wasn't the right thing to do, but I'm going to just go on my way. You go on your way. And, best of luck to you.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
So next question, and we already kind of touched on it, but just to kind of rehash this, what can be some of the problems or challenges of having an unforgiving heart?
So the um I think the problems and the challenges, like, to kind of reiterate what we've talked about. Number one, the burden that you carry. Carrying unforgiveness has a cost to it, and the weight of that burden can be extraordinarily heavy. Um, there is the time cost. Life is so short and so precious, and spending time carrying unforgiveness from something that is past, from something that we cannot control, particularly when somebody cannot be or will not be held accountable, that has a cost. Um, the I think In addition to those, uh, when we allow that to become a way of being, um, when repeated actions drive us to a place where our initial response is to be unforgiving, then now we've created um, an unhealthy dynamic by which we engage with others.
Mhm.
And then it's hard to have any kind of healthy relationship, whether it's family members or friendships, or romantic relationships, or with work colleagues. It's hard to be healthy anywhere if we have developed reflexive habits of unforgiveness.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Once again, you dropped so many gems, but I want to key in on and talk about the burden that unforgiveness causes, which essentially causes stress, and stress can create all types of health issues. And so it's like a lot of times I think that we may we may not recognize or be mindful that like unforgiveness, it's like a domino effect. It's like you're already carrying this burden around, then like you have the stress of that burden that you're carrying around, and then it's starting to seep into other areas of your life, whether that be, like you said, family, church, work. And a lot of times with the unforgiving heart, you can find yourself treating people the way that the person that offended you
Mhm.
treated you, because you're operating from a place of hurt. And so now it's like you can find yourself seeing all these issues in other relationships or potential relationships that could have been really great relationships.
No, that's exactly right. I think um, a common saying is, if you look over the course of a series of your relationships and the same issue keeps popping up, then it probably has something to do with you. Whether it is that you are attracting similar things over and over again, or you are showing up in in a particular way, um, that we can kind of create um, patterns or habits that bring that out in our lives repeatedly.
Absolutely. And I think, and I didn't have this wrote down, but I think oftentimes and most commonly, this can be seen in romantic relationships. Even going back to our original discussion around heartbreaking and healing. So there are sometimes situations where we have a relationship with someone that may be toxic. We get our heart broken. Like there's just a lot of hurt there, and so we leave that situation, and sometimes the healing or forgiveness doesn't come immediately or as quickly as we like, but we move on to another situation, and now we find ourselves trying to start a new relationship with somebody operating from the place that we were in with the old person or the old situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I remember and I guess it's still now like floating around on Facebook, and it was about like romantic relationships, and it's like come here healed and ready to go, and it's like in theory, right? Like in theory, yes, come here healed, but unfortunately, a lot of times it's not always that simple, because I think we all would like to, be like I'm healed, ready to go, like heart open, like I'm ready for this. But a lot of times those traumas kind of creep back in moments, especially when like triggers happen or like similar situations. Like, I remember what happened last time, and that's where those defense mechanisms go up, because it's like, no, I'm not getting hurt again.
Yeah, no, that's real. I think um, there is nothing like the pressure of relationships to show us where we really are in our healing journey.
That part.
Um, that you can think you are healed or are beyond something. And then when you are in the daily, regular pressure of a relationship, it is a mirror
Mhm.
that can show some things that may not be flattering.
Right, right.
Um, One of the things that I had to learn is when I was younger and less mature, I would blame that on the other person.
Hmm.
That person is bringing this out of me. There's something
Hmm.
about this person that is creating this reaction in me. As I have gotten older and wiser, I have realized that those reactions are not because of the action of the person, but the reaction is my responsibility. And that there is time and space to think about and respond to whether or not the action of the person was healthy or unhealthy, in bounds or out of bounds, whether it was okay or problematic.
Absolutely.
But all of those things are completely separate with how I reacted to it. And so, like, since I'm on the example train today, I'll give you another one. I'm a sports fan, and just the other day, LeBron James was playing against the Celtics, and he was fouled at the end of the game, and the refs didn't call it. That's objectively true. There's picture evidence that it happened. We see Jason Tatum's arm on his arm. The refs never made the call. That actually happened. That issue is completely separate from his reaction to the issue, which, in my estimation, his reaction was completely overboard and out of bounds. And was not about what happened there, but it was about a whole lot of other frustrations that seemed to be building up with him that took that moment to explode. And when we get into relationships and either we have not done any work towards healing, or we have tried to and we find out that we are not as healed as we thought we were, then we have these reactions. And part of the process of healing in relationships, because we're naive if we think we're going to do all of our healing and then get into a relationship, right?
Right.
Part of our ability to heal in relationships is to be able to press the pause button and then stop and look and say, okay, what happened? How did I feel in the moment? How did I react to it? What part of that reaction is really about me? What is it bringing up in me? And how do I deal with that apart from the issue of what happened? And then I can go back and deal with the issue of what happened with the person with whom it happened.
Absolutely. And I think that for most people, and I would say even for myself, the piece of being able to step back and like evaluate the situation like that is the hardest thing. I know, especially for me, like I'd be on 10, like I'd be ready to go. I'd be like, no, this is you. So that's definitely something that I'm still working on. Like you said, of recognizing that, okay, what about this? What about this situation could tie back into me in terms of where I'm at in my healing or my triggers or things that are still hurt within me?
Yeah. And I think, I'm going to put a quick plug in for people to join Beloved Community Church, come worship with us. One of the things that we do as a part of our worship is to practice that reflection process, right? It's not just to come to church and hear the singing and hear the preaching, but it is also to do the reflection work and to say, what have I heard? What about what I've heard is echoing in my life? And part of the reason we do that is because if we practice doing it with a sermon on Sunday, it makes it easier to do that with my reaction Monday through Saturday.
Absolutely. And I think you captured that perfectly. Like you said, if I am practicing that response and working on that within myself regularly on Sundays through, regular Sunday worship and Bible study, then it makes it easier to practice that, like you said, Monday through Saturday, or when I'm in other settings outside of church, when I'm at work, when I'm interacting with my family, my friends, all of that. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and whatever the practice place is for us,
Hmm.
church is a can be a great practice place, but maybe it is in a communal group that you have. Whatever the space is, we
Hmm.
need spaces in our lives where we can practice reflection,
Yep.
preferably in communal space, because
Hmm.
it's easier to do it when there are more than one person doing it, and then I can take that practice then and use it and apply it in my own life.
Absolutely. And I think, not to get too far off a topic, but I think for me, another thing that is helpful for me with reflection is having people around me that care for me, that will hold me accountable. So if it's something that I've talked to a close friend about, and they're like, in a loving way, will kind of call me out like, hey, Tia, this is something we got to work on, or something we got to tighten up in a loving way. So I think that that's also something that's helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. I mean, that's the beauty of community.
Hmm.
Um, I want to think about this from a different perspective if we can.
Sure.
I am very presently aware of our friends and family in Memphis, Tennessee right now,
Hmm.
and all that they are dealing with as they are living through processing the extreme trauma
Hmm.
of having one of their family members, one of their community members, um, painfully, brutally beaten by police officers and
Hmm.
killed.
Hmm.
And the community is going through all of that process
Hmm.
of responding to that and reacting to that.
Hmm.
And part of the question that inevitably arises is, what part does forgiveness play in this process?
Absolutely.
And the same that it happens in our personal relationships as what happened in the money example that we talked about before, that there is a accountability has to precede forgiveness.
It has to.
And if there is no accountability, we can't even get to a conversation about forgiveness.
Right. Right. Because the accountability piece isn't there.
It's not there.
Right.
And then, just like I can't heal in the space of a relationship
Hmm.
if there is no accountability in the relationship,
Hmm.
a community can't heal
Right.
in the midst of a tragedy if
Hmm.
there is no accountability for the
Hmm.
tragedy, which
Hmm.
is why we've seen uprisings in Ferguson
Hmm.
and Baltimore and New York and Cleveland,
Hmm.
all over the place because of a lack of accountability.
Right. Right.
Now, if I can push that one more further,
Yes.
you just said it is helpful to have a community that can call you out and say in love, this is where you need to be accountable for yourself or be accountable for someone else.
Hmm.
And most people who are in relationships acknowledge that one of the best ways of nurturing that relationship is to be in a community of people who are in relationships, so that community can help reflect that to those individuals in a relationship.
Right. Absolutely.
The same is true for this issue of police brutality against Black people,
Hmm. Hmm.
is that when our city governments stop seeing protesters as a threat to public safety and rather see them as a partner towards
Hmm.
greater public safety,
Hmm.
we can get to a place quicker where there is both accountability and healing for communities because we aren't trying to push away the people who are holding the system accountable for how it treats people.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm so glad that you touched on that, because I mean that's definitely something that we absolutely tonight needed to touch on. So I'm glad that you brought in that point. And again, going back to in both examples, when there is no accountability, and this is a continuous thing, it creates distrust across the board in both examples, that looks different, but the bottom line is there's distrust.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That is exactly right. And whether it's distrust of a person, where you've got, people in relationships with each other, going through each other's phone, checking
Right.
on each other's location because you don't trust the person you in relationship with, or whether it's the relationship between a community and city officials, where you don't trust anything that the city says because you've seen a pattern of mistreatment and lack of accountability.
Time and time again.
Yeah. And when that trust is broken and there's no effort to repair that trust, then it creates for continued bad relationships.
Absolutely. So again, thank you for bringing that up and touching on that, because I think that was very important point, and that we needed to touch on that. So next question: why do you feel that some people become bitter over time?
I mean, this is like exactly what we've been talking about. Like, this is a great question to follow up on this, because I think one of the causes of bitterness is continued presence in harmful relationships where there's no accountability. And so if I stay there either because I choose to,
right,
or because I have to, because we've got to be honest and clear-eyed about this, is that whether it's a romantic relationship, a family relationship, the relationship with a community in a city, the relationship between Black people in America, sometimes there's choice, sometimes there isn't choice. But either way, bitterness can form when there's repeated wrongdoing with no accountability, and either a choice not to forgive or the inability to forgive because of the lack of accountability.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, like you said, what we've been talking about this entire time, when you're in situations and you feel like this negative thing is continuously happening to you, no matter what, you're like, okay, this happened one time. This happened 2 times. This happened 3 times. This happened 4 times. This happened 5 times. And again, there's no kind of ability or acknowledgement. I think that it's only human nature that your attitude towards the situation, the person, is going to change. In terms of, like, if you started like with a more positive perspective or a happy outlook, and then you keep getting a negative situation or response, I think for any of us, after so many experiences, it can lead to bitterness and resentment.
Yeah, I mean, it is only natural, if you have if you hit your hand in the same spot over and over again, you're going to form a callus on your hand. And that is your body's way of protecting that spot. And the same thing happens with our heart and emotions, is that bitterness happens when we are experiencing pain repeatedly without properly addressing it. And part of the question we have to ask as the recipient of hurt or pain is, what is my part in this?
That's real.
How much of this is things that are legitimately beyond my control? How much of a part am I playing in this? And when we are able to see and acknowledge the parts that we play in the conditions that create hurt for us, it can help us to come to a place of acceptance, or to come to a point where we decide we're going to make change. And either one of those can help us to, in the long run, avoid bitterness.
Absolutely. That is so real. And that's where sometimes the accountability within ourselves comes into play. Because I definitely, in certain situations and certain relationships had to, in my forgiveness journey, take a step back and be like, okay, I'm not saying what the person did to me is right. But at a certain point, I had to decide I'm going to stop showing up for the nonsense, and it's just kind of like, and that's not always the easiest thing to do, because like a lot of times I was operating from the space, well, no, they shouldn't have done this, and I did all of this for them, and all of these different things. And while all of these things may be true, at the end of the day, in some of those relationships, I had to step back and be like, but I'm still kind of showing up for this.
I heard somebody say, if you don't like clowns, stop going to the circus.
That part, exactly. Stop showing up for the circus. Absolutely. Okay, next question. Do you feel like it's harder to forgive those that are closest to us?
I think it's both. I think it's easier and it's harder. And for the same reasons. The people who are closest to us are the people that in some way or another we need the most, even if we don't always want to admit it. And so for that reason, it is easier to forgive them, even if the actions they have taken have been egregious. Also, the level of disappointment or hurt that we feel when somebody close to us wounds us deeply can make it harder to forgive them, because it is the person that I trusted, the person that I never thought would do that, the person who by their actions make us question what they think about us, or make us question how we feel about ourselves. And so those things can make it that much harder to forgive someone who's closest to us.
Absolutely. One of the hardest things for me, and you hear this statement all the time where people are like, take nothing personal, but that's the hardest thing to do, because again, especially just speaking for myself, when things happen to me or someone does something to me, my initial response is, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? And it brings up all of these insecurities. So I definitely agree with your answer. Like it's a little bit of both.
No, it definitely is. Which means, as we've been talking about reflection and being intentional, that is the part where we have to be the most careful, because it is possibly easiest to pretend forgive or to think that we have forgiven the people who are the closest to us,
right,
when we actually have not done it.
Exactly.
And allow those pockets of resentment to build up, and then create dissonance in what we say about the people closest to us and how we actually treat them.
Absolutely. And then this just popped in my head. Sometimes I feel like there's almost pressure to forgive from like people make statements like, oh, but they're family or you're a Christian. And like you said, I think sometimes where some of that pretend forgiveness comes into place where you feel like, oh, well, wow, like they are my family and I don't want to appear a certain way. So I forgive you. It's fine. We don't have to address it. We're cool.
And these are situations where a broader community are really helpful in helping us navigate through this, right? Because there are some things that need to be let go and move past, right? A family member borrowed money, they didn't pay it back. That I can let go and move past. Especially once I've raised the issue with them, it's clear either by their words or by their actions that they are unable or unwilling to pay it back. I can move past that. I might never lend them money again.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I can move past that. A family member who has responsibility for caring for me has caused harm to me. There is, outside of the space of accountability, that's not a place where it's family, forgive and move on from that. No, there's actual real harm that's happened. And I should not have to be forced to be in relationship with somebody who has caused harm to me just because they are family.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. Like, I don't have to be in a close relationship with this person, but I can still forgive them and like have no ill will against them, but I don't have to be in a close relationship with them.
Somebody, one of my church members talked about an absolutely wonderful practice they have. Just like all of us do, they have this that happened in their families. One of their family members caused harm to another one of their family members. And so what they have said is the family member who has caused harm is not welcome to family gatherings at their house until they acknowledge and are accountable for that. Now, they don't have any lack of love for them. They still talk to them, and they still they will still interact with them one-on-one, but they have set it clear that in this house you can't come to family gatherings until you acknowledge what you've done with this person.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And that is a container for accountability so that the person who has been hurt know that they have a safe space in this house all the time, that they can come to that house for any gathering and don't have to worry about the presence of the person who has caused harm to them. And I think there are ways that we have to be thoughtful in our families, in our churches, in our communities for how we protect the people who are the most vulnerable among us, particularly from people who have caused them harm or have a track record of causing harm.
Absolutely. And like you say, it's about, and this, again, where community comes into creating those safe spaces for people, so they can feel like if I go to this space that I feel protected and cared for, and I don't have to worry about feeling like I'm going to be continuously harmed.
Right. Yeah. And that way we, the people who are the intermediaries, right, the people who hold that space, those are the people who are providing freedom for the person who has been hurt.
Absolutely.
You know, that sometimes we are responsible for providing our own freedom. Sometimes we are responsible for providing spaces for others to enter into freedom. And so there are times when we have to be thoughtful about how do we work to create space where someone else can be free.
Absolutely. And it goes back to your point earlier of that there's no like one standard answer for every situation. You know, every
Mhm.
situation is different, and just like recognizing and adjusting, you know, based on what the situation is and the people involved.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna switch gears a little bit. Just kind of as we start to wrap up the show, I have a few quotes about forgiveness, and I'm
Okay.
gonna read the quotes, and I just want like your what comes to your mind first thing.
Okay.
All right. So forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Let me know if you need me
Forgiveness
to run it
is,
back.
go ahead, run it back one more time.
Okay. So forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart.
I think there's some truth to that.
Okay.
The So I love the writings of Bell Hooks. May she rest in power. And her writings on love have been really, really instructive to me in my life. And one of the things that Bell Hooks says is that love is not emotion, but love is action. In that we can feel, I forget the word that she uses to describe it, but she has a word that she uses to describe the emotion and the passion that we normally associate with love. But she says that's not where the love is. The love is in the disciplined action. And I think forgiveness operates like that too.
Right.
That I don't have to feel like forgiving in order to forgive. Forgiveness is about an action. And so that it operates differently than what's happening in my emotions. I would just refer people to the first 20 minutes of our conversation, where we were talking about avoiding forced forgiveness, and forgiveness that causes harm.
Right.
I think if we are carrying those things in mind, then yes, it is possible to forgive even if we are still angry. It is possible to forgive even if we are still hurt. It is possible to forgive even if we're still wrestling with the implications of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you captured that perfectly. And like you said, the first 20 minutes of this conversation, I think really kind of captures support around that quote.
Yeah. So if you're jumping in right now, go back and watch that on one of these platforms, on whatever your platform you're on. Go back and watch the first 20 minutes of the conversation because it was fabulous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So next quote. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that prisoner was you.
Set the prisoner free. Yes. Yeah, I think that's so true.
Yeah.
Like we said, you know, when we talked about the benefits of forgiving others, you know, that as I forgive, I release myself from the prison of unforgiveness. And then whatever happens in the relationship happens from a position of greater freedom, as opposed to holding on to unforgiveness and then trying to decide, you know, from being locked up how to respond to somebody.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, and I think it was probably within the first 20 to 30 minutes of the discussion about, freeing yourself from that place, being a prisoner of hurt. Because a lot of times when you're, and we talked about this in great detail, when you're operating from a place of hurt and you're a prisoner of that hurt, it's starting to seep in various areas of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think I definitely really agree with that quote, freeing yourself from that prison.
Yeah. Yeah. Let yourself free.
Right. Yeah. All right. And last quote. All right. This is a long one. So let me know if I need to run it back.
Okay.
Forgiveness is not always easy at times. Sometimes it can feel more painful than the wound we suffered. To forgive the one that inflicted it. And yet there is no peace without forgiveness. You want me to run it back?
Yeah, run it back for the people. I think I know what I want to say on this. But run it back
All right, so
listeners.
one more time for y'all. Forgiveness is not always easy at times. It can feel more painful than the wound we suffered. To forgive the one that inflicted it, and yet there is no peace without forgiveness.
So it's the last part of that I want to raise some issue with.
Okay.
The peace really is an inner state of being.
Mm-hmm.
As we talked about before, forgiveness requires accountability.
Mm-hmm.
The lack of accountability might mean there has to be a lack of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean that there has to be a lack of peace.
Right.
So if I do something to cause harm to you, Tia,
mm-hmm.
And I refuse to be accountable for it,
mm-hmm.
It is for you to do the work of forgiving me
mm-hmm.
without me being willing to be held accountable for what I've done.
Right.
Could in many cases do more harm to you than good.
Mm-hmm.
Then you may make a decision. The best thing that I can do in this situation is not to forgive an action where there's a lack of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can be at peace that you've made the right decision about it, because you're not forgiving is not because you are trying to hold a grudge.
Right.
But it is because you are holding a firm boundary about where there has not been accountability.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely would agree. I think that last statement, I would have to definitely piggyback off of what you said, and really highlight the fact that peace is within yourself in a state of being. So I definitely feel like you raised a good point on that and wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, it is. And which is, the whole process, talking about this in terms of reflection, being able to both internally, like, take an assessment of ourselves, as you said, have the community of people who can provide input and feedback on that. Those things are so important in the places of forgiveness, because it can help us to see where we are sabotaging our own peace because we refuse to forgive when forgiveness may be called for. Or when we are sacrificing our peace because we are trying to forgive where boundaries may be called for.
Exactly. And that's where it comes into play, that it's it can be difficult to find that middle ground,
Mm-hmm.
because no situation is the same, and there's
Right.
not one just right or wrong answer. Like, oh, well, when this has happened, here's the manual. This is how you
Mm-hmm.
behave.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I
Right.
wish there was a manual.
Right. Your
So,
3 steps to forgiveness.
right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah, and you have to be fluid in that and
mhm.
be in conversation and wrestle with the hard questions around that.
Exactly. Because the thing about it is, I could have a situation, I could take that situation to six different people and guarantee I'm going to get pretty much six different answers of how,
Mhm.
oh, girl, if that was me, then I would have done X, Y, and Z, or I would have done A, B, and C. So, yeah, that's where you kind of have to be fluid and flexible around
Mhm.
your responses and how you decide to move forward.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Well, once again, we had another amazing conversation. Um, you were coming through with the examples. I'm not even gonna lie.
I felt like it's being here in this place that I've been preaching, virtually. So I felt like the Baptist preacher examples coming out of me.
For sure, for sure. And I loved how we were able to tie in like our initial discussion about heartbreak and healing into today's discussion and just like life in general. I think that was
Mhm.
very, very valuable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we have like any other questions or if you have any last remarks, but I think we have covered everything tonight.
Well, no, thank you so much. Thank you for extending the invitation to me. I just want to say to all of the people who are following me, whether you are tuning into this on my IG or you are tuning into this on um, our social media platforms. These conversations that Tia is hosting are fabulous, and so I want you to have the opportunity to see them and tune into them, even when I'm not her guest. And so, would you tell the people how they can follow you or connect with you and see these conversations that you have?
Sure, sure. Once again, as I was saying earlier, I do these conversations once a month, usually on the last Tuesday of the month. And usually I stream through my Instagram account, Evo Consultation. However, thank you to Nelson tonight for opening up different platforms. And so it's definitely inspiring me to start streaming through the other platforms as well. And then all of the conversations that I have monthly are recorded and I upload them to my YouTube account, which is Fashion is a Habit One.
So please go subscribe to Fashion is a Habit One so you can see not only the former conversations, but see the ones that are coming up in the future. So you can pay attention and be a part of these great conversations. And also, lastly, I just want to shout out all of the people who are doing the hard work on the front lines of Memphis right now.
Mhm.
The Our friends and family down there are engaged in very, very emotionally difficult work. We want you to know that we are praying for you and praying with you in that work. As you are trying to hold that city accountable for its actions, and knowing that the work you do there is going to have a ripple effect out to all of our cities. And so, for those of you who are on social media, um, do me a favor and go find the people who are on the ground in
Mhm.
Memphis, Tennessee. The person I follow is Reverend Earl Fisher. That's EARLE Fisher. But who go find people who are on the ground doing that work,
Absolutely.
because their voices are going to tell you what you won't see on
Mhm.
MSNBC or CNN or any of these other news stations. They will tell you what you won't read in the USA Today, and they will let you know the difference between the political posturing that is
Mhm.
happening and the actual needs of the people on the ground. While you're following people, while you're following us, go follow people who are in Memphis who are living this out, so that you can elevate their voices in the midst of all that's happening.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for saying that. Yeah, that definitely is important and needs to be said. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Also, I know you mentioned earlier, but if you could remind the people again, and tell the people if they want to attend Sunday morning service with you, the details around that.
Go to belovedcommunitychurch.com. And there you will see the service information. You can stream with us this week. Well, for the month of February, you can stream with us. This week it will be at 11 o'clock. There's a time change coming, so be attentive to that. And then starting in March, you can join us in person if you're in Cincinnati, or you can continue to stream with us through YouTube, our Facebook page. You can see us on LinkedIn. Any of our socials, you can find us and connect with us, and worship and reflect with us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And huge shout out to you for just being willing to come on this platform and do this. I know like you are a super busy person, and the way that you showed up for us and just drop soul, like much knowledge. Like I am truly, truly thankful for that. And the way that you set us up tonight with the technology and streaming on all the different platforms, because that's not my skill set. I'm good at a lot of things. Not that. So thank you again.
No, glad to do it. So glad to do it. And thank you for hosting these conversations. It is I think undervalued the level of energy it takes to say, I'm gonna do this thing, I'm gonna host this thing, I'm gonna put this thing out in the world. And you hosting it gives great opportunity for individuals like me to come have these conversations. So thank you so much for doing that to you.
Well, thank you. And once again, if there are any other, although we're wrapping up, if there are any other questions, I know we've listed all of like our platforms. Feel free to still reach out to us. We are more than happy to continue to ask questions or have another discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to it. Look forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for viewing, and take care. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.